Genetically engineered trees. The first question is, which they're also called genetically modified trees, and the first question is, what are they? And in a sense, it's the same as what they've done with genetically modified or genetically engineered food. They're taking genes out of a totally separate organism, a bacteria. They're taking genes out of a totally different bacteria or another plant or an animal, and they're inserting them into the gene of the tree to make it do unnatural things. For example, kill insects, resist toxic herbicides so they can dump toxic chemicals on them and they will still live, make them grow faster, make them be sterile, make them be cold tolerant, all of these different things that they're doing to trees in an effort to increase corporate profit, in essence. So that is the purpose of genetically engineered trees, and the science itself is very risky. The process of taking a gene out of an organism and inserting it into the DNA of a tree is all by itself very destructive to the gene of the tree, the genome of the tree, causes all kinds of mutations and unintended consequences that in the long term they really don't know what that will do to the tree as it grows. So that process all by itself is very destructive.
What we have to stop.
Okay. Okay, so the other problem with genetically engineered trees, besides the unintended consequences from actually damaging the genome, is the unintended consequences as the tree grows, or the side effects that they can't predict as this tree grows. For example, there's something called gene silencing that's a very mysterious thing where they will, for example, have, this was an actual experiment, they made a flower, a petunia I believe it was, they wanted it to be extra red, so they inserted a gene to make it extra red, and instead it came out white. And nobody knows why, but it's this phenomenon called gene silencing. So this is especially problematic when you're talking about trying to make sterile trees. They want to make genetically engineered trees sterile, and they argue that this means that they won't then spread their pollen and their seeds and contaminate other, native forests. But the problem is they can't 100% guarantee that. And with this phenomenon of gene silencing, there's no way to know what seedlings will grow up and then suddenly, for no reason that you can explain, be extra fertile and send out all kinds of pollen and seeds. There's no way to know that it won't do that. There's also no way to know how environmental stresses will react to the tree as it grows. So, for example, in the 5th year of the tree's life, there's a drought. How will that impact the genetic manipulation in the tree? Or there's a freeze, or it's very windy, or whatever. Any of these environmental stresses can turn certain genes in the tree on or off in response, which means that how that so this means that there's no way to know what will happen to a tree as it ages in response to these stresses, what will happen to that modified genome. So these are all problems, these are all very serious problems. The contamination issue, that trees do spread their pollen and they do spread their seeds, and it has been documented that trees can spread their pollen over 600 kilometers, and they can also spread their pollen even potentially further. There was a study at Duke University in the United States that looked at how far conifer trees in North Carolina could spread their pollen, and they found through their modeling that they could spread their pollen all the way from North Carolina into eastern Canada, which is over 1,000 kilometers. So the notion that they can contain these trees once they release them commercially is ridiculous. It can't be done. So we're looking at potentially insect resistance in trees. Poplar is a favorite tree for putting the insect resistance gene into. Those poplar trees could then spread that pollen and their seeds with this insect resistance gene, which means the tree itself kills any insect that tries to use it, could spread that gene to native forests, native poplars, which would then become contaminated and spread it even further and further and further. And with poplars, they're all throughout North America, they're throughout Europe, Northern Asia. Poplars are very, very widespread, so that's a serious problem. Serious potential problem that could happen from insect-resistant poplars. In China, actually, they've already released on a large scale insect-resistant poplars, and the Nanjing Institute of Environmental Science found, I believe it was 2 years after the trees were planted, that they were already contaminating the native poplars in the region. So, you know, this is a genie that is out of the bottle in some areas, but that we would really like to make sure doesn't get out of the bottle anywhere else, and we would like to make sure that there are no other trees that are commercially released. In the United States, one of the trees that they're talking about releasing is eucalyptus that have been modified to be cold tolerant. Eucalyptus have a very narrow range because they require certain temperatures. And so what they're doing in South Carolina in the US, this company called Arborgen, is modifying the eucalyptus so they can withstand temperatures down to minus 20 degrees Celsius, which greatly expands the range where they can grow. Monoculture eucalyptus plantations are already an enormous problem in Chile, in Brazil, in South Africa, anywhere that they're being grown. They're only native to Australia, but they're being grown all over the place. They're highly invasive. And what Arborgen wants to do is create huge eucalyptus plantations across the southern US, which then means they could start contaminating native forests all through that region with eucalyptus seeds. Not the pollen, because there aren't native eucalyptus, but the seeds themselves would contaminate the forests, and you would have eucalyptus invading those native ecosystems. So these are the plans that are being put out there by different companies, and the question is why? What is the purpose for these trees? Well, the purpose for these trees are a few. One is for pulp and paper. Was the main reason they really wanted these trees. They wanted fast-growing trees that could be pulped very quickly in very short 3 to 5 year rotations and continue to supply the growing need for pulp.